Hi, welcome everyone on behalf of RSM to our session on managing, engaging and retaining a global workforce in the tech sector. My name is Ross Stupar. I'm a tax partner and the office managing partner in our Edinburgh office, and I also lead our tech sector proposition for RSM in Scotland and as part of our national UK tech team. We're presenting this session in collaboration with TechNation, and at the end of this session, Hazel from TechNation will highlight some of the support that TechNation can provide when your businesses are working internationally. At RSM, we work with a lot of businesses in the tech sector, and we increasingly find that the more globalized economy and the more agile ways of working, that tech businesses are looking globally to access a wider pool of talent. So therefore, in this session, we have some great speakers who will talk through some of the opportunities and challenges operating with a global workforce brings. Firstly, we'll have Jude Lean. Jude's one of our senior HR advisors, exploring some of the HR and engagement considerations you'll need to have as you work with a global workforce. Before Liam Renton, one of our tax experts on employment taxes and global mobility, talks about some of the practical overseas tax and social security consequences that need to be addressed proactively, preferably. And then we're delighted to have David Meikle, the Chief Technical Officer for Lingo24, who will share some insights on how he and Lingo24 have managed and engaged their global workforce in lots of territories spanning UK, Romania, Philippines, and many others. So hope you enjoy the session and you get lots out of it. And I'll pass over to Jude to cover off some of the HR considerations first.
Morning, everybody, and thanks, Ross, for that great introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. So just give me a second to get that up. Hopefully everyone can see that there. And as Ross mentioned, I'm going to take some time to talk to you about the people side of our global workforce at the moment in the tech sector. So very much looking at what's been happening in the last 20 months and what those challenges have been, and how things have changed and developed throughout that time as well. And you can see in this first slide here that there are numerous people challenges, and obviously with the backdrop of that global pandemic, we have seen a rise in the uncertainty of our future, although one thing is very apparent that we will need to evolve all of our businesses, and as people we will need to adapt to constant changes as they come through. Therefore, as business leaders, we need to be monitoring and evaluating the working practices and operating models that we use to support the minimisation of any impact of change, and whether that be economic, social, or the political impacts that we're seeing at the moment. We've seen phased impact of the pandemic on both our working practices and people, with both positive and negative connotations to that. We've seen a rise in new expectations around flexible working and how people work and when they might want to work as well. The 9 to 5 is no longer a set time frame for us to be coming in and out of work. We've got the introduction of hybrid working and people considering their own work-life balance within that as well. And alongside this, businesses have had to consider the act of creating a safer working environment in offices, but also thinking about those home workers now as well. With this, we've also seen more people suffering from burnout and virtual fatigue because they're constantly on a screen, or they're feeling that they need to be at their desk more at home and working longer hours to finish things off. And not getting that time to switch off and do something sociably, or do some favorite pastimes that they might have. But managers are also grappling with the importance of improving that team productivity, regardless of where people are working or how people are working. So I'm sure, I don't have to talk too much about the global war on talent at the moment. It's all fairly evident in the news, and recently we've seen quite a lot of changes there as well with Brexit, and the challenges of working with a multi-generational workforce, as these challenges have been here prior to the pandemic as well, but obviously in the last 20 months, it's increased the importance of having a recruitment and attraction strategy in place and a framework for developing staff appropriately. engaging across all of the generations in a meaningful way, and with meaningful conversations to stimulate an active, inclusive workplace, and somewhere where people feel that they can share their knowledge, and be creative in that space as well. So, by creating that inclusive environment and that inclusive culture, it enables everybody to be heard and understood and respected. And the business values will transcend through communications, policies, procedures, and programs of development, and foster positive attitudes among existing staff. But that will also help to attract those people that you're hoping to come into the business and work with you, and those people who will share similar values to yourselves, and you'll see those behaviours coming through. I've probably talked a little bit too much on the doom and gloom side of things in terms of the current people challenges, but I wanted to turn our attention to, how we can overcome some of these obstacles, as we continue to develop and grow our businesses, and our networks on a global basis. So, I've hinted at the need to focus on meaningful conversations, and the values that you place within the work that you're doing. And these elements are really at the core of why people come to work and what makes work enjoyable for them. So I'd like to focus our attention on how we can build more of that meaning and that purpose to support the development of individuals and also the success of our businesses. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide here, and you'll see there's quite a lot of information contained in this slide, but it is designed to be a building slide to support the management, engagement and retention of our staff regardless of where they're based. And you can see right at the centre of this, we are looking at building an authentic connection with our staff and potential staff to create and continue to develop mutual respect, trust and confidence within that working relationship. So you can see from the slide, the trust and confidence is one of the 4 aspects that support a strong working relationship in that purple diamond or square, depending on which way your brain configures that visual picture there. And each of those 4 aspects enable teams to work well together to create a highly productive output. I've already mentioned the need for strong purpose that will support staff and team development along with retention. And that aligns in with individuals and the team values. And that kind of brings me to the outer circle then. And within that outer circle that you can see, there's key activities that support each of the 4 aspects of the working relationship. Maintaining agility across the team through providing flexible working opportunities, but also through developing continuous improvement processes and seeking out constructive feedback as individuals and teams. That will support a quicker response to the changing environment in which you're operating. And people will need to be open to receiving and giving feedback as well as, sorry, excuse me. Sorry. People will need to be open to receiving and giving the feedback, as the trust will have already been developed there, but it can be harder to maintain that trust. Therefore, the other aspects are also important to building that, and developing it further. So having that sense of a social network that you can hold each other accountable within is very valuable, but equally it allows for the development of initiatives that are going to support individuals and teams in achieving their own individual goals. It also creates a platform for management to understand what's working really well and what hasn't been working so well, and that helps to maintain the engagement and commitment to the original goal of the business. And when you bring your value proposition to the forefront of your business and your staff buy into that purpose, the culture naturally evolves, and every activity that takes place is highly intentional, with people operating from a positive mindset. We've all, or at least I hope we've all had experience of working in a team environment like this, where everything just happens. It tends to just fall into place at the right moment, and you feel like you have the ability to speak up freely, and you make suggestions for further improvements. And the only way I can really describe it is that there's a real buzz throughout the business. And if you haven't had that experience yet, I suggest that you start with getting really clear on what it is you're seeking to achieve, and then start to share that with everyone in your team and across the whole business. And as you go through that process, gaining some feedback for ways to improve, and also providing people with the opportunity to support the attainment of those goals. So every business will be unique in your own approach to achieving the goals and the ambitions that you've set for the business. And obviously that will be very different depending on the internal and external influence that you have within the business as well. So however, some of the recent activities that the HR consulting team have been involved with are just included on the next slide. So let me just get that across for you. And so these are just some of the practical solutions that we have been involved with over the last 18 months to support businesses in managing and engaging with and retaining their key talent within their teams. You can see, we've completed communication plan, communication development, and which I think is so important for employers now, and ensuring that they are engaging with staff appropriately and regularly, repurposing that proposition as an employer of choice, and making the employment relationship a core aspect of their work to ensure that there is a genuine two-way engagement with that. In terms of performance management, we've obviously seen a swing from people looking at what the inputs have been into performance to looking at what the throughputs and outputs may be, and looking at levels of productivity. But within that, we also need to make an assessment of skills and capabilities within the team, and where they are available across the team to take the business to the next stage of development, and where they're considering that gap, how can we fill that? And so we've been looking at that with a number of businesses, and also pinpointing those rising stars for the future, and looking to provide them with support for a strong successor plan. It'll be no surprise that we've had numerous conversations around flexible working benefits and what that means. And it's not only just looking at people changing their working hours or the days that they work, for example. And we've had quite a number of businesses who've done that coming out of the furlough side of things. If you're based in the UK, people did a bit of a flexi furlough arrangement where they may have been working 2 or 3 days a week, and then off on furlough the other few days. But what we have been looking at is hybrid working policies moving forward. So people are taking the opportunity right now to take stock of where they've been, and where they're looking to for the future. And within that, having a real foundation of how that working practices are going to be from a hybrid perspective is really helpful, just to set out your stall as an employer, how that will operate, and how people can buy into that as well across the team. And again, looking at the benefit side of things, people are taking stock of, what is our base pay looking like on reflection for that global war on talent? Are we sat in the right place with our reward strategy, but also thinking about the total reward side of it? What are the other benefits that are provided to our employees and our staff members? Are they reflective of what people are looking for now in terms of gaining a good work-life balance? And then finally, we've been working with a number of other businesses around management development and giving line manager training. So thinking about things around conflict management or performance management, as I've already mentioned. We've done some specific work on that as well, but equally supporting managers and having those one-to-one conversations with people to build out the development of the team. And also thinking about some of the more practical things around absence management as well, and how people may want to consider returning to work, because everybody has had a different experience in the last 18 months, and therefore thinking about how they might want to reintegrate into the business is really important. And it's really important for line managers to understand that approach as well and be able to share that. So I guess, depending on the stage of maturity of the business, we have been supporting with other aspects of development, including reviews around equality and diversity and inclusion strategies, and the health and wellbeing strategy development, and looking at the recruitment processes and really honing in on those as well, and thinking about the management information that people want to share from a people perspective in the business. So what's really going to help the overall business goals and objectives for the future. But I think the real takeaway from today is just to keep the conversations alive across your business at all levels and in all locations, and consider the business use of communication mediums for the message that you're wishing to convey. I think we've all had experience of sitting on Teams calls all day, for the period that we're in work, and sometimes it may not necessarily be appropriate to use a Teams call. It could be that you pick up an actual telephone and call somebody and have a chat that way. But I think we've grown into this virtual world with a knee-jerk reaction given the pandemic, and now is a really good opportunity just to take stock of what is working for us and what's not working so well, and how can we make that better. And I think that will support the growth of that trust and confidence I was talking about earlier, and it will improve the communication, the innovation and the creativity that you're looking for within a business as well, along with more social integration. And it will also reduce the burnout and that idea of presenteeism. And hopefully in turn that creates a more stable working environment for all staff. But I'm going to stop chatting there now and hand you over to Liam, who's going to talk about some of the more practical elements around the tax implications of working on a global basis.
Thanks for that, Jude. I'm just going to bring up my slides quickly. So hopefully everyone can see that, but good morning everyone. As Ross mentioned, I'm Liam Renton and I'm an Associate Director in the Employment Tax team here at RSM. I'm based in Edinburgh, however, my remit covers supporting our clients across all of Scotland. So COVID has accelerated the question that if you have shown you can work remotely, can you work anywhere? So where one employee works overseas, this is likely to result in employment taxes and social security considerations for employers and employees in that overseas country. So I'm going to just discuss briefly the key employment tax and social security considerations of having a global workforce. So first of all, social security. In general, for social security, the employer and the employee should pay social security in the country that the employee works in. However, the employee and employer can remain in the employee's home country social security framework in certain circumstances. That would involve applying for a certificate of coverage with the overseas territory. There are different social security rules for each country. Broadly, there are three categories, which I'm going to briefly describe just now. For example, working in the EU, which might be the most common one, generally the employee and employer can continue to pay UK national insurance for up to 2 years if the employee is temporarily assigned to work in an EU country. Likewise, if they're coming the other way into the UK, then they can continue to pay social security in their home country. Otherwise, the employer and employee would both be required to pay social security in the EU country that the employee works in if there's no certificate of coverage that's applied for there. So when an employee works in a non-EU country, the treatment is based on the social security agreement that's in place with the UK, if indeed there is one. Now, in some cases, you would pay social security depending on the number of days that the employee spends in that country, but the terms are outlined in the social security agreement, so you have to consider each one on its own merits. But if there's no social security agreements with the UK, there's a rule called the 52-week rule, which means that essentially if an individual or an employee is moving to work in an overseas country, the employee and the employer would continue to pay UK national insurance for the first 52 weeks after the employee leaves the UK. And then on the flip side, if an employee comes from an overseas country to the UK, then the employee and employer would continue to pay social security in their the country that they've came from, and there'd be a UK national insurance exemption for the first 52 weeks. Now, after that 52-week period has ended, then the social security rules based on the country's local laws would need to be considered and applied. Because we've seen that in some cases there's no social security rules in place in certain countries, but in other cases we've seen that there are more robust social security rules in place. So each one has to be considered on its own merits. So when an employer and employee has to pay social security in an overseas country, that can create reporting obligations for the employer and employee in that overseas country. So that may mean that the employer has to make registrations and filings with the local tax authorities in that country. So again, it's all country by country. So on to payroll reporting, where an employee performs duties overseas, there may be payroll reporting and withholding requirements for the employer. So usually the basic principle of worldwide taxation is that it depends on the employee's tax residence position. So if an employee is tax resident in a certain country, say the UK, they'd be taxed on their worldwide income in the UK. Typically, we see that in most countries, an individual would become resident if they spend more than 183 days in that country, so half the year. Then typically they would become tax resident there, and that would mean that they're likely to be required to pay income tax on their worldwide income in that country. But there are sometimes specific rules for each country that need to be considered. However, employment income is taxed slightly differently in the sense that it's based on where the employee carries out their duties. So if an employee is working overseas, this may therefore create overseas payroll deduction and reporting requirements for the employers, as I mentioned before. So these specific reporting requirements will differ depending on the rules in that country. Or the country that the employee is working in. So what we've seen, for example, France, one of our clients had a few employees based out in France, and France has a monthly payroll reporting and withholding system that's similar to the UK pay-as-you-earn system if an employee is French tax resident. However, if an employee is working in France but they are not French tax resident, then there's a different reporting requirement there where it's a quarterly withholding return and the process is completely different. So care needs to be, it's so easy to trip up on payroll reporting, so care needs to be taken and advice needs to be sought where appropriate when an employee is working in an overseas country. So where there's a reporting obligation for the employer, this may also require the employer to register an agent in that overseas country to report the payroll and withhold the appropriate taxes. And this, what we found is that this can result in additional costs for employers of not only the potential additional social security costs or rates, but also professional fees in not only the UK but the overseas country in order to comply with reporting and withholding obligations. Particularly when there's an agent involved, that means that, you know, essentially they have to file everything on the employer's behalf and they wouldn't be able to do it themselves, which can get quite expensive. So again, payroll reporting needs to be considered on a country by country basis, as each of the countries have different rules. So there are some other tax considerations that I'll briefly touch on just now as well. So first of all, for corporation tax purposes, there may be a risk that the employee working overseas creates a permanent establishment in that overseas country. This might result in a proportion of the company profits being attributed to that employee being subject to corporation tax in that overseas country. So I'm not going to talk too much more about the corporation tax side of things, but we'd recommend where an employee is going to be working for a significant period of time overseas that the advice is sought there, because again, we've seen some clients trip up on this as well, thinking that there's no issues at all. In addition, there are also individual tax obligations to consider for the employee. So, they may be required to file personal tax returns in that overseas country that they're working in, and this will involve registration and ongoing filing with the local tax authorities. So again, it depends on the rules in each of the different countries, but we found that some countries have more onerous reporting obligations. Some of them are a bit more lax compared to the UK, but there are also different personal taxes to consider as well. So, for example, in Spain and Italy, there are wealth taxes in those countries that the individual would have to pay, which we don't have in the UK at the minute. So just to pull it all together, I'm going to briefly discuss a few different scenarios to just summarise the tax and social security considerations on a more practical level. So what about employees that are staying and working in an overseas country for, say, a couple of weeks? Their family hire a villa for a month, and the employee has a 2-week holiday, and then he's going to be working for 2 weeks remotely. So generally, because of the short length of time, there's unlikely to be any issues in that overseas country, as the individual unlikely become tax resident there. And but again, it's important to just double check that with with advisors in that particular country, just to make sure there are no tax or social security implications. So what about employees that stay and work in an overseas country a bit more longer term? So say for a couple of months, they're working remotely there, then that could present a risk that the employee becomes tax resident, depending on the rules in that country. If they're not careful keeping track of the days, because a couple of months could become 3-4 months, and that may cause some issues. If they're staying in that country for less than 6 months, then there's unlikely to be any social security issues there, but there may be potential payroll reporting in that country, again, depending on the local rules. So that needs to be confirmed with advisors if that scenario is going to be happening with an employee. So we've also seen employees that have been stuck in certain countries as a result of the COVID pandemic, and they've had to work remotely in the country they were stuck in. So some countries had easements with the rules where, essentially there were no reporting obligations there, and they showed a bit of leeway because of the scenarios. But unfortunately, most countries we've seen have continued their rules with no easements at all, which then means if an employee is stuck in a country for a significant period of time, 6 months or more, let's say, then that would present a risk or an obligation for the employer to deduct and withhold and report payroll taxes, and also social security for the employee and employer. So, for example, one of our clients had an employee that was stuck in India for a year, and the employer in that scenario had to file quarterly payroll withholding returns in India, and the employee was also required to file an Indian personal tax return as well. So it is something that there's sometimes not that much leeway given, depending on the scenario. Now, hopefully, we're over the worst of people getting stuck, but as we've seen with rising cases, that may well become a more endpoint in coming months. So how about an expansion overseas and recruitment of overseas talent to work remotely overseas, as Jude mentioned, the global talent tug of war. So this would almost certainly result in payroll reporting and withholding obligations, and also the same for social security for the employer and employee. And again, as I mentioned before, there may be permanent establishment risks for corporation tax purposes. So in these scenarios, absolutely, we would recommend that you seek advice and consider the obligations and implications in that overseas country. So what we typically say that is, in general, if an employee is staying and working in an overseas country for more than 30 days, then that's probably the pinch point where we would recommend, well, I think you need to check this out and get some confirmation from and seek advice from advisors in that overseas country to make sure you're meeting your obligations as an employer for tax and social security purposes. So hopefully that gives everyone a flavour of the key tax and social security considerations for a global workforce. So I'm going to hand over to David Meikle now to tell us a bit more about the issues that he's faced in practice here.
Thanks, Liam. I'm just going to share my screen as well, just with a little bit of context for Lingo24. Hopefully you can all see that now. So essentially, to really talk about our challenges and what we've been up to at Lingo, you kind of have to maybe give a bit of flavour about Lingo24. So essentially, we help our clients engage and communicate with their global customers, partners, and employees in their own language. And we do that through a range of translation and content services. Essentially, we try and combine the power of state-of-the-art artificial intelligence and natural language processing and automation with the creativity of professional translators to help make sure they get that global content right, whether it be culturally sensitive to that location, and just because words matter, get the right words in play for those customers. And we're kind of proud to work with a whole range of different customers across the globe, from the likes of Patagonia bringing their unique message to the market and their customers around sustainability in commerce, or the likes of Intuitive Surgical, where we support them to take their advanced medical robotic devices, which achieve game-changing patient outcomes, including regulatory reporting, or developing the software so it can be used by clinicians all over the world. So that's a bit about us. And to do that, we have a kind of global team to support it all over the world, in different countries such as Panama, Romania, the Philippines, got a team in the Netherlands, here in the UK. And in preparing for this session, the team asked me to talk about kind of the key drivers behind our global team and why we have that. How do we engage that team, and the kind of practical considerations when we're working globally. And for us, the kind of key drivers are driven by what you've just seen. It's really having proximity to our customers. We work with the teams and those customers across the globe, and also proximity to our key partners. The translators that we use are effectively freelancers, and we have a network of over 5,000 translators. We have a key policy of in-country native translators to really deliver that cultural sensitivity, knowing what's not only the right words to use for a bit of content, but also what metaphors and scenarios matter in that culture or market that you're talking to is really key. And having people who are there on their time zone and able to pick up the phone or answer email or work with them directly is really key. And the second main driver is really that access to skills and talent relevant to our industry. And it really comes to life when you consider our work in the likes of Romania and the Philippines. In Romania, the education and ecosystem that's there is really core to our presence in that country. It's an excellent hub for language skills and linguistic skills, given the way that their education system funnels people at an early age based on their skills, whether it's a language skill or whether it's the likes of mathematics and computer science. And therefore, they get channeled quite early age and produces really great talent in there. So for us, our location in Timișoara has a great university that has both language expertise. So you find people who have great languages. They can speak many different languages, which is fantastic for engaging with customers in their language. But also they really care and are passionate about linguistics and the language that's there. One of our key kind of values at the business is, because words matter, It's very important, and that really plays to that. It's also a fantastic technology hub. They've got great technical schools, and it's a great place for talent, with lots of big companies coming in there, with the government putting lots of incentives in for companies to come and make their base in Romania, but also incentives for talent to stay in Romania, and we'll touch a bit on that later. And in the Philippines, which really serves as a hub to cover our Asian presence and a night shift to cover America, it's really got a history, particularly Cebu, the city we're in, as a kind of hub for excellent customer service skills. People make a real career for that, and the whole environment is set up to support it. If you happen to go to Cebu, you'll see the city is buzzing 24/7. People are used to working different shifts their whole lives, and livelihoods and relationships are built around that. So it's a great place to get also excellent talent with multiple languages and kind of customer service skills, but also people who really want to build a career around it. So basically, those two things are what's driven a lot of our choices around where we go and build our global teams. And in doing so, the team had asked about how we engage those teams, and we've really made that kind of conscious decision to build a global company. It's not a business that has operations in different countries. It's a business that happens to have members who work in different hubs. So we've really taken this global team with local hubs presence. We're probably already doing a bit of hybrid working and that kind of flexible working before the pandemic, and it's really helped us, to be honest, with that transition post-pandemic, with indeed some of our hubs at the moment still having a very torrid time with COVID, particularly over in the Philippines. But all our teams effectively have kind of cross relationships around the globe, with our team basically working 24/7 and following the sun in terms of working practices. We've made a kind of conscious effort to also have like leaders across different hubs. Members of our senior management team are from different countries, and there's real local leadership as well. Whilst we have a kind of global, lots of like kind of global policies and frameworks, we give the freedom for teams to run their own local events and engage their team locally. But the key thing for us has always been, and it's harder now, is that kind of face time and lots of it, consciously traveling to the different hubs, really engaging with the teams, getting to know them, and really understanding how they operate as a culture and a team. And that's probably one of my main practical considerations. Each of the cultures we operate in is unique and has its own norms and sensitivities. And no one likes stereotypes. I try not to do it, but you can kind of see the history of a culture and the aspects of the norms play out and how you operate in a business manner, and really taking time to understand that your colleague in the Philippines probably isn't going to challenge you directly, but has a really strong view that if you just take the time to circle back with them afterwards and talk to them, you'll get some really great insight. Or your colleague in Romania is a bit more scared of that change, just because of how their culture has evolved, and actually spending a bit more direct time with them to understand their fears and aspirations, you can really get that change that's required. Equally, the language we all use is different. We found a lot of simple things like the word decent is really positive in Romania. It's probably quite an average statement here in the UK, and just getting those common language and shared bits is really really important to help understand one another. Really understanding the local ecosystem and participating in it is key. Particularly in a lot of different locations we've tried and made a conscious effort to engage with the local universities, take student placements and start to become part of it, and then therefore understanding the incentives and opportunities that are available. Particularly in Romania, there's some good tax incentives around for individuals around technology. So if you're in a technology role and had a technology degree, there is a reduced rate of personal income tax, and we couldn't take advantage of it in the way we were set up initially, where we're focused as a business services company, but doing a little bit of work to reclassify as a technology company allowed us to get that incentive for the team and really have an impact on the earnings they take and the ability to attract talent. There's also unique aspects of operating in Romania around the collective agreement and collective bargaining around employees, and linking that into your benefit strategy of we're negotiating collectively with the team there. We're able to construct local benefits that work for them while still keeping them as part of the global strategy. And we've seen that in a lot of the other localities there. There's also cultural norms that are important to understand. For example, in the Philippines, when someone goes through a family event, it's culturally normal for the company to play a more active role than you would here in the UK, and really understanding those aspects and being able to support the team in the way that maybe a local company would do, really again helps to retain talent and look after the team and just be an active part of their culture and like the environment locally there. In terms of global mobility, we faced one of the gotchas Liam mentioned, where we've got a team who are spread all over, and we've tried to support people in their aspirations to spend time in different localities. And something we thought was very simple, moving someone from the UK to Romania, turned out not to be simple, because we were doing probably the exact opposite of what Liam would advise you to do, and managed to get ourselves in a real bind where if we'd just taken the time to get a little bit of advice up front, we would have structured that relationship differently. And the good thing about that is, having went through that experience and that costly experience of rectifying it, we've been able to support other people to make those moves. We had colleagues who wanted to move to the Netherlands, and we were able to set that up in a far more structured way, creating a branch office, supporting them to move and really retain that key talent in the business. So whilst probably none of this is rocket science, that real making that decision to commit as a global company to understand your locality and the frameworks you operate in and engage in it is what's allowed us to really harness that talent across the globe and be able to get the skills to meet our key business needs of being close to our customers and close to our partners who deliver. So yeah, that was
Fabulous.
That was all from me, Ross.
Thanks very much, David. That's really great insight. So thank you for that. I think before we wrap up, I think Hazel, you're going to just give us a little bit of insight into how TechNation can support tech businesses in Scotland, UK, and working internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't already know TechNation, we're a UK-wide organisation that's supporting scaling tech companies. So I'm an entrepreneur engagement manager, and I cover all of Scotland, but I have a counterpart in every other region of the UK. And it's our role to really support those companies that have a high growth potential. And naturally, those companies will be looking at expanding their teams and expanding their customer bases and headquarters overseas. So in terms of TechNation's core offering, we have a digital business academy, we have an insights department, we produce growth programs, including a pitching competition. We work with some of the largest companies in the UK. We've worked with Just Eat and Deliveroo and Truva and Bulb, although they've just gone under. And it's really our role to kind of recycle that knowledge and that information background. We're also the leaders of the FinTech delivery panel and the Law Tech delivery panel. So we've got fingers in lots of pies to sort of support tech very broadly. But in terms of international, we have two kind of core things that we can support with. One is that we have recently brought in an international team. So originally we were kind of very UK centric, looking at the UK, and we understand that tech companies will be scaling and their markets will be outward. So we have started with APAC. We have teams in Australia, in Singapore, and in Japan. at the moment, and we will be expanding that. So we will be looking at the US and we'll be looking at Europe. Our international team is absolutely incredible, and they're putting on events. They've got boot camps, we've got workshops. Most, if not all of that, is free at point of entry for entrepreneurs themselves. So really worth taking a look at the support that we have on offer there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we are the endorsing body for the Tier 1 Global Talent Visa. And if you don't know much about the visa, that's cool. I don't know that much about the visa in terms of the legalities, but the difference between that and another kind of visa is that it's the individual themselves that funds it and kind of organizes it. So it's not a case of an organization sponsoring an individual to come and work for them, which can be risky. You know, you're having to put a lot of money into talent and it may not work out. The Tier 1 Global Talent Visa is about bringing in talent kind of as a baseline. So they would apply for the visa themselves, and they fund it. Of course, you're welcome to contribute to that if you like. And then once that individual has a visa, they are able to work in any organisation in the UK. So it's a really fantastic resource if you're looking at bringing in existing team members who want to relocate to the UK, or you're looking at hiring. We've got a fantastic kind of bank of visa holders that are kind of certifiably great at what they do. We have also just created something called Thrive, which is a program for visa holders to help them get settled in the UK. So again, if you are bringing in talent, if you have someone that is holding the visa, it doesn't have to be our visa, it doesn't have to be the Tier 1 Global Talent Visa. They could be holding any other visa, but if they're working in tech, it's basically an immersion into what does tech look like in the UK, how can you kind of engage, what the things that you need to know. David mentioned earlier, you know, the culture, and I thought that was such a great point, and that it's not just about the kind of the benefits and the money, but it's actually how do you engage with the culture when you're working somewhere. So the Thrive program helps with that, and we can also help with relocating. So it's just a fantastic program. So I think that's everything from me. Thanks, Ross, and thanks for all of the incredible information that you've all shared. It's so valuable in this kind of modern, confusing world. Just thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thanks, Hazel. Thanks very much for that. So that it falls upon me just to wrap things up then for everyone. So firstly, I want to thank Jude, Liam, David and Hazel for their valuable input into this session. Now, when we set out to do this session, we wanted to make sure that we covered various angles associated with working globally. You know, we've had Jude cover off the softer side of people management, Liam cover off some of the technical aspects around managing the social security and tax systems and the red tape associated with people working for your business in overseas territories. And then David's really valuable input into how that beds into the business from a practical perspective. And like Hazel said, I think the one of the real practical takeaways I took away from that was just embedding and immersing yourself into the culture and ecosystem that the business operates in those overseas territories, and really understanding how those territories and how the people that you work with in those territories tick and think. So, you know, everything that our speakers have covered today has been based on their practical experiences working with or within tech businesses who've been seeking to manage, engage and retain a workforce globally in order to really bootstrap a business's development and its growth. So if you've got any questions about any of the content that we've covered today, or wish to explore any of the themes that we've covered in a bit more detail, please do not hesitate to contact us. You know, we'll display our contact details at the end of this recording. And you know, all I've got to say now is thank you for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the content and have a great day. Thank you.